Hello, this is Nathan Wood, pastor of North Dayton Baptist Church, and welcome to day 23 of the McShane reading plan. Glad you could join us. We're in Genesis 24, Matthew 23, Nehemiah 13, and Acts chapter 23. Genesis 24. Abraham is prompted by the death of his wife to think about the marriage of his son Isaac. He obviously wants Isaac to be able to have children earlier in life, and he calls to him his most loyal servant and sends him to go take from his homeland of Ur the Chaldees, but he doesn't want Isaac to go back there. Taking a bride from the Gentile nation, apart from the promise, to bring them in, to be the bride, to bring them into the promise. Sounds metaphorically like the church, doesn't it? You see, folks, Israel's fall was a terrible thing. Sadly, there are some Christians historically, or claiming to be Christians, people of the late 1930s, early 1940s, Third Reich, who believed that the peril of the Jews was a good thing. But sadly, folks, there's people like that today. Not only in militant Arab countries, but also in Western countries, even in the United States, even in the church, who at best think Israel is irrelevant and at worst believe them to be vermin. Do we worship the Jewish people? No. But the Jewish people are the inheritance of God. He is called a bride of all nations, but he has an inheritance in the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He loves them. Nehemiah 13, verse 2, because they met not the children of Israel with bread and with water, but hired Balaam against them that he should curse them, howbeit our God turned the curse into a blessing. This is referring to when the enemies of Israel called on Balaam, who, you remember the talking donkey, called on Balaam to curse Israel, and all he could say is how wonderful Israel was. And he proclaims that there's a star going to come out of Jacob. That's passed on to the wise men through the school that Daniel heads in Babylon. The coming Messiah, the coming kingdom. And he proclaims blessing on those who bless them and cursing on those who curse them. What man means for evil, God uses for good. For his chosen, for his loved ones, for those who have put their faith and trust in him. Count on it. Romans 8:28, such a mighty verse. For we know that all things work together for good to them who love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Are you walking in your call? Are you walking in your call to make disciples, to teach others about Jesus, to teach them the way of salvation? But anyway, moving forward, that gives us context for so much of the other things that are in our reading. Verse 11, when Jesus speaks in the book of Acts. Words in red, verse 11, and the night following the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. Later, Paul's going to appeal to Rome, and the Roman authorities are going to say, well, if you hadn't appealed to Rome, we wouldn't have to send you. But that's where he was going. A bad thing turns into a good thing. It's marvelous. It's marvelous. So just, Sarah's death brings Isaac to a place where he has Rebekah, And that's a wonderful story if you looked at it. The obedience of the servant, the elegance and righteousness of Rebekah. Isaac ends up being a bit of a scoundrel himself. Of course, a lot of us men are meatheads anyway. But Rebekah is just absolutely glowing in her demeanor, in her physical beauty, and how she carries herself and how she conducts herself. She's just a princess. And she comes to Isaac, and she's a wife to him, raises up 2 boys, and we'll get to that later. And she ends up favoring one over the other because he did. Anyway, but something bad, Sarah dying, brings to remembrance the need for Isaac to have a wife. Something bad happening can lead to something good. And at the end of Genesis 24, we have Isaac being comforted. Something bad for Paul, being put in prison, being put in chains, gets him transferred to Rome to stand before the emperor himself. Nehemiah, Balaam called to curse. There's blessing. Their bondage in, this is kind of multi-layered, their bondage in Babylon causes them to repent, but they repent so far that they become legalistic, which causes them to reject the Messiah when he comes in Matthew 23. Scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. By this time, the religious establishment is worshiping their own quote-unquote righteousness and piety. They are more concerned with their own good behavior than they are with loving the Lord. They don't even recognize the Lord when he's in their midst. And so they're called a generation of vipers. They claim that they wouldn't have been the ones that killed the prophets, when in fact they are killing the prophet, the priest, the king, the God of heaven. They're putting him on trial for death. And so we come to verse 37. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and you would not. This is a genuine offer. This is a genuine if-then. He's not saying this. If God had just predetermined that Israel was going to, unilaterally changed their minds like a bunch of computer robots and said, nope, you're going to reject me. It's a genuine decision on their part to reject. He could have given them the kingdom at this time. It was a genuine offer. God knew that they wouldn't. He purposely sent Christ at a time when he knew the time was right, when they would reject him, but it was still their decision. God didn't coerce them to do evil. He sent the Son at a time when he knew that they would do him evil. He genuinely wanted to gather them together, and he will gather them together. But what's the point? What's the point? Another bad thing happened. Israel rejects, and the Son of Righteousness is slain. Why? So he could rise again. After having paid the penalty of death and hell and the grave, that he could rise victorious over death, hell, and the grave. After having borne the wrath, he arises victorious. And since they rejected the kingdom at this time, he can extend salvation to the ends of the world. He can go get a bride from the far country. Ladies and gentlemen, don't throw Israel under the bus. Don't think too much of yourself. Think much of Christ, who can transform any situation to the absolute best and greatest good that anybody has ever known. Do you know him? It's my prayer that you do. We love you. Have a good evening.